The core argument: the malady of the West and its pagan cure. Cultural pathology. Benoist argues that the problems of the West, specifically Europe, are not merely political but deeply cultural, stemming from the adoption of Judeo-Christian monotheism. Radical cure. The proposed solution is the rejection of Judeo-Christian monotheism and the redevelopment of Indo-European ideology. Nietzschean hammer. Benoist, like Nietzsche, believes in tearing down the rubble of 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian accretions to European culture. Secularized monotheism. The text highlights how Judeo-Christian ethics and universalism have become secularized, influencing modern ideologies like wealth redistribution, radical individualism, and the sacrifice of freedom for responsibility. Paganism versus Judeo-Christianity. Fundamental oppositions. Time and history. Chapter 2:11. Judeo-Christian, linear, vectorial time with an absolute beginning, creation, and a foreseeable, necessary end. Messianic times, last judgment. History is an interlude leading to a return to a pre-sinful state, ultimately aimed at annulling humanity's self-created history. Pagan, cyclical or spherical conception of time, eternal return. History is not governed by external necessity and is shaped by human will. The past is a relevant dimension of the present, not a definitively past point. Emphasis on connecting with the eternal through mythological memory rather than returning to a lost paradise. The Sacred, Chapter 3:15. Judeo-Christian. God is radically transcendent, separate from the world. Monotheism is presented as the hate of the sacred as such, Levi, desacralizing the world to emphasize God's absolute otherness. Faith in a singular, personal God. Pagan. Divine immanence. The world is animated and its soul is divine. The sacred encompasses and gives meaning to the profane. Gods are centers of values and beliefs are value systems. Values remain even if gods pass. Spirituality involves a fundamentally religious relationship between man and the world, sacralizing it. Dualism, Chapter 5:22. Judeo-Christian. Radical distinction between the created, world, and the uncreated, God. God is absolutely transcendent, separate from nature, and the world is not divine. This leads to secondary antinomies, body versus soul, mind versus matter, and a process of dissociation from the real. Creation ex nihilo. Pagan. Denial of dualism. The world is animated and divine. All creation comes from nature and the world, which is non-created, eternal, and imperishable. God achieves himself in and by the world. Theogony is identical to cosmogony. Emphasis on the coincidence of opposites. God, Creator and Father, Chapter 6:31. Judeo-Christian. God as Creator, ex nihilo, and absolute Father. Man is a lesser being, devalued, and his freedom is conditional on submission. The father-son relationship is neurotic, with a repressed love-hate dynamic and the son unable to truly succeed the father. Pagan. Man is perceived as both father and son of the gods, with no radical rupture but differences in intensity. Generations succeed each other without opposition. Man shares in the divine by surpassing himself, embodying the hero as an intermediary figure. Human nature and freedom, Chapter 7:40. Judeo-Christian. Man created in God's image and likeness, but as a mirror-like dependent object. Humanization is seen as a fall, original sin, with a violent reaction against human autonomy and self-consciousness. Freedom is the renunciation of freedom, culminating in submission to God's law. Pagan. Man participates in the entirety of existence, connected to the world and the divine. Freedom is a political notion, not a moral one, to be conquered and asserted through self-mastery and will to power. Man constructs himself, shapes nature, and creates meaning. Fall or rise. Chapter 8:47. Judeo-Christian. Humanization is a fall from paradisiacal innocence, Garden of Eden. Progress in civilization, Cain's city-building Tower of Babel, is a crime against Yahweh, leading to punishment and a drive to neutralize human history. Emphasis on humility and the condemnation of pride. Pagan. Humanization is a rise. Man is a civilizing hero who actively transforms the world and establishes culture. Great deeds and making a noble name justify existence and earn a piece of eternity. The Primacy of Mankind, Chapter 9, 58. Judeo-Christian. Yahweh is the sole I of the universe. Others are mere egos. Man's worth is derived from his creator, emphasizing his insignificance compared to the divine. Pagan. Solemn affirmation of man's primacy. Gods are modeled on men and exercise a functional social role. Man is the sole creator of the gods, shaping them through his will and aspirations. Beneath and Beyond, Good and Evil, Chapter 10, 61. Judeo-Christian. Primacy of morality. Yahweh as judge defining absolute good and evil. Suffering and guilt are linked to sin, perpetuating a system of moral explanation and redemption. Rejection of the idea that good and evil can coexist harmoniously. Pagan. God sits beyond good and evil as a unity of opposites. Evil is not an absolute value, but what prevents self-actualization. Ethics are tied to human values and choices, not external prohibitions. Struggle and conflict are positive, fundamental realities leading to growth. Iconoclasm and Beauty, Chapter 14, 87. Judeo-Christian. Iconoclasm, prohibition of depicting Yahweh or worldly things, even man. Beauty is separated from good. Art is relegated to lies. Emphasis on the invisible, abstract, and intellectual. Pagan. Art and beauty are inseparable from religion and the sacred. Gods can be represented, and art is a means of their representation, exalting a type and making it sublime. Visible, tangible reality is foundational. The Universal and the Particular, Chapter 15, 95. Judeo-Christian. Approach from the universal to the particular. Totalities and categories are primary, with individuals as manifestations. Humanity as an abstract idea. Pagan. Approach from the particular to the general. Conceptualization of the universal based on the abstraction of concrete particulars. Diversity is the foundation of knowledge. Monotheism and Polytheism, Chapter 16, 99. Judeo-Christian. Radical break from polytheism, asserting Yahweh as the unique and sole God, often denying the existence of other gods or labeling them as idols. Monolatry evolving into monotheism. Campaigns against idolatry. Pagan. Recognition of a plurality of gods as expressions of the divine. Gods are aspects of a single being, the world. Polytheism is a qualitative and not quantitative concept. Tolerance and Intolerance, Chapter 17, 110. Judeo-Christian. Intolerance as a consequence of belief in a unique, universal truth and absolute good. Struggle against error becomes a duty, leading to devaluation or elimination of the other. Pagan. Constituent principle of tolerance, stemming from acceptance of diverse gods, mores, and world conceptions. Recognition of the other and the dialectical process of self-construction through positive confrontation. Politics and Anti-Politics, Chapter 19, 128. Judeo-Christian. Politics continually reduced to morality. Sovereignty belongs solely to Yahweh. Human political power is intrinsically evil. Ideal of democracy, rule of law, judges, and the abolition of distinctions and conflicts for universal peace. Pagan. Politics is an autonomous and essential human activity serving practical organization and social cohesion. It involves command, obedience, public-private, and friend-enemy relationships. Struggle is a positive reality. Legitimacy of pluralism and collective identities. Man's place in nature. Chapter 20, 150. Judeo-Christian. Emphasis on the desert as a symbol of monotheism, detachment from nature to facilitate divine revelation. Man is separated from nature, and his physical being is often devalued. Pagan. Continuity between man, gods, and nature. Man actively participates in existence, shaping and giving meaning to nature. The divine is immanent in the world. Rejection of flat naturalism in favor of symbolic comprehension. Sex and the Body. Chapter 21, 159. Judeo-Christian. Devaluation of the body and sexuality, linked to original sin, carnal lust. Asceticism, abstinence. Woman often seen as having greater animality. Pagan. Freely assumed natural sexuality, not unbridled but with standards. Emphasis on the strength and beauty of the physical body. Positive asceticism, self-constraint to construct oneself, giving form to impulses rather than extinguishing them. C. The Return of the Gods. Europe's other religion. Benoist traces a spiritual continuity through heretical trends within Christianity, Pelagius, Scotus Eriugena, Meister Eckhart, etc., that align with pagan principles of divine immanence and human transcendence. Heideggerian influence. The concept of being in the world, Dasein, and questioning the nature of being are central to preparing for the appearance of the god or for the absence of the god in our decline. Nietzschean. Overcoming. The death of the moral god leaves a space for new gods and the pantheist affirmation of a yes to all things. This involves overcoming European nihilism by asserting man as a creator of himself, cultivating a will to power, and embracing the eternal return. New metaphysics. A shift from a metaphysics where God created the world ex nihilo to one where man can bring God into existence through his will and meaning-making. This involves affirming the world, embracing contradictions, and rejecting negativity. Alain de Benoist, through Stephen Edred Flowers in the preface, defines the malady of the West, or cultural pathology in Europe, as stemming from the European adoption of Judeo-Christian monotheism. He proposes a radical cure, which is the rejection of this religion, and the redevelopment of our own Indo-European ideology. Benoist sees the task of establishing a new pagan philosophy as requiring the tearing away of the rubble of 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian accretions to European culture. The book highlights several specific problems and characteristics attributed to this cultural pathology. Secularized Judeo-Christian ideology. Even when disengaged from religious roots, Christian ethics and universalism have been used to rationalize various societal issues, including the redistribution of wealth, radical individualism, universal political suffrage, and a general eagerness to sacrifice freedom to avoid responsibility. Dualistic conception of the world. Judeo-Christian monotheism is fundamentally dualistic, resting on a radical distinction between the created world and an uncreated, transcendent God. This creates an abyss between God and the world, viewing the world as not divine, eternal, or self-sufficient. Christianity, in particular, accentuated this dualism by adopting secondary antinomies like body versus soul, mind versus matter, leading to a serious process of dissociation from the real. Contempt for the world and life. Influenced significantly by Paul, Christianity views everything as a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of Christ, and as dung in comparison to gaining Christ. This disdain for the world extends to knowledge gained from it. Nietzsche interpreted Christianity as saying no to life. Devaluation of human nature and freedom. Judeo-Christian monotheism actively obstructs man's capacity for freedom and creative autonomy, viewing man's rise to a supernature culture as rivaling Yahweh. The sin of sins becomes pride, the desire for absolute human autonomy, the will to power, and self-expansion. This consumes man's vitality, making him a stopgap and leading to a negative anthropology. Primacy of morality and guilt. Biblical thought is described as hypermoral, reducing all human activity to morality and establishing God as a judge. This system imposes an external code on the world, causing guilt and a bad conscience, and uses suffering to perpetuate its morality. Christian morality is seen as burdened by resentment, suppressing diversity in the name of equality, belittling in the name of justice, and destroying potency. Linear and terminable history. In the Judeo-Christian vision, history has an absolute beginning and a foreseeable, necessary end, oriented toward the realization of Yahweh's plan. This contrasts with pagan cyclical views and sees history as a long parenthesis between an ideal past and a messianic future. The ultimate end of history is envisioned as the disappearance of conflicts, diversity, and all will to power, leading to a peace of the cemetery. Devaluation of space and rootedness. Judeo-Christianity prioritizes time over space, viewing paradise as a temporal state rather than a geographical place. It promotes nomadism and deterritorialization, condemning attachment to land, specific cities, patriotism, and frontiers as idolatry or incestuous. Iconoclasm and depreciation of beauty. The biblical ban on images is seen as a clear anti-aesthetic bias. It leads to an emptying of human representation and a preference for abstract understanding over sensory perception and aesthetics. This is connected to a contemporary depreciation of beauty and the promotion of ugliness. Universalism and reduction of diversity. Biblical universalism, based on the idea of a single man created by a unique God, leads to a reduction of human differences and the idea of an abstract, generic man. This approach tends to deny identity and promote assimilation, described as a racism of identity denial. Intolerance and refusal of the other. Monotheism, with its unique and completely other God, inherently promotes intolerance and the devaluation of the other. This reasoning, when secularized, can legitimize fear of otherness, racism, and exclusion, and even justify massacres. Anti-politics. Biblical thought rejects political autonomy, reducing human action to morality and transferring ultimate authority to Yahweh. It condemns human power as intrinsically evil, exalting weakness and justifying the downfall of the powerful. This anti-political stance is seen as leading to the negation of political struggle and the pursuit of a universal peace that entails the disappearance of differences. Devaluation of sex and the body. Christianity, more radically than ancient Judaism, promoted a hatred of the body and sexuality, contributing to guilt. It viewed celibacy and virginity as superior to marriage and encouraged negative ascetic practices. Neurosis and alienation. The clash between European paganism and Judeo-Christian monotheism has created a veritable neurosis in the European mentality. Man, alienated from his own freedom and subjected to a distant God, becomes an object. Modern society, despite the death of God, continues to be shaped by these secularized Judeo-Christianity values, leading to a generalized infection of negative assessments of human autonomy. What is the Nietzschean hammer? The Nietzschean hammer refers to a philosophical method of radical critique and deconstruction employed by Alain de Benoist following Friedrich Nietzsche to dismantle deeply entrenched cultural and religious ideologies. Its primary purpose is to tear away the rubble of 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian accretions to European culture. As presented in the book, this hammer is used to challenge and expose what is perceived as the detrimental cultural pathology rooted in Judeo-Christian monotheism. In essence, the Nietzschean hammer serves to expose the underlying negativity, resentment, and life-denying aspects of Judeo-Christian values, which, according to Benoist, continue to permeate modern European thought even after the death of God. The ultimate aim is to clear the way for a new pagan philosophy that embraces a yes to life, the will to power, and an affirmation of the world's contradictory diversity. Benoist traces a spiritual continuity through heretical trends within Christianity. What are these trends, and how do they align with pagan principles? Alain de Benoist, through Sigrid Hunke's systematic work, traces a spiritual continuity through heretical trends that emerged within Christianity over centuries. He views these as expressing the true religion of Europe, which aligns with pagan principles, particularly a neo-Faustian paganism. These trends and their alignment with pagan principles are identified through several key figures and movements. Pelagius, late 4th century. Pelagius's views are presented as arguing for the prerogatives of free will and the idea that man could live without sin and that God desired this. He opposed the Augustinian conception of grace, due to biblical election through a redeemer, with a grace of creation and the perpetual immanence of divine nature in human nature. This aligns with paganism's emphasis on man's self-sufficiency in thoughts and deeds, not needing a redeemer to cleanse original sin. Pelagianism stresses that man can act entirely according to his will, blurring the contradiction between grace and liberty into a fusion of both qualities. Scotus Eriugena, 9th century. Eriugena, excommunicated after his death, emphasized the transcendental unity of the cosmos and the continuity between God and the world. He wrote, "Everything is in God, and God is in everything. Nothing can come elsewhere but Him, because everything is born in Him, through Him, and in Him." This aligns with pagan thought's view of a world animated and a soul of the world that is divine, where God realizes Himself in and by the world, and the divine is immanent and consubstantial with the world. His idea that to look at things is to contemplate the Word suggests an identification or consubstantiality between things and the Word of God, contrasting with Judeo-Christian dualism that separates created being from uncreated God. Meister Eckhart, 14th century, and his disciples, Henry Suso, Johannes Tauler, Sebastian Frank von Donauwörth. Eckhart is a central figure in this continuity. He believed in the union of human will and divine will as a consensual act. For Eckhart, man's self-indulgence and inability to achieve active impersonality or Olympian detachment, Gelassenheit, rather than original sin, separated him from God. He denied the need for retreating from the world to find godliness, instead preaching an inner solitude that allowed one to penetrate to the bottom of things, to grasp his God there and be able, through a vigorous conscious effort, to give him form within himself according to a consubstantial mode. His concept of being is dynamic and vital, gushing forth and ascending to the divine. Eckhart's idea of the soul and God leading a common life, where God is born in and by the human soul, implies a profound reciprocity and an irregularly occurring consubstantiality of God and man. He even suggested being freed from God to fully belong to God, indicating a transcendence of conventional religious boundaries. Jacob Boehme and Paracelsus. They are identified as heirs to this tradition. Boehme's notion of potentiality and his statement that you yourself will be God, and wherever you look, you will see God, if you live a saintly life, resonate with the pagan idea of man's potential to share in the divine. Paracelsus likewise believed that God who is in heaven is also in man, and that the entire universe could be found within man. He even suggested that the apostles surpassed Christ, implying a human ability to surpass the Creator. This contrasts with Judeo-Christian monotheism, which seeks to prevent man from attaining superhumanity and becoming godlike. Joachim de Fiore. Mentioned as part of this tradition, his ideas often focused on distinct ages of history, particularly an age of the spirit, which some interpret as a progressive spiritual evolution that could involve new forms of understanding the divine. Erasmus and Leonardo da Vinci. These Renaissance figures are also noted as heirs, reflecting a period of renewed contact with the spirit of pagan antiquity and an emphasis on human potential and inquiry. German Romantic and Idealist movement: Goethe, Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Schleiermacher, Herder. This movement profoundly resonated with pagan principles. Goethe defined man as God's dialogue with himself and stated that to deal with God and nature separately is exactly as if we thought our body and soul were separate entities. His emphasis on the primacy of action and his Faustian hero's triumph over Mephistopheles, justifying God's confidence in him, reflects a belief in man's creative power and self-overcoming. Hölderlin asserted that it is man's divine portion that senses the divine in nature. Schelling declared war on dualism, stating that the being of the soul is divine and that God is in man and man is in God. Schleiermacher considered it impiety to seek the infinite outside of the finite, reinforcing the idea of divine immanence. Kant placed the foundation of morals within man's inner consciousness, the categorical imperative, rather than in an external law. This aligns with pagan ethics derived from human experience rather than divine prohibition. Teilhard de Chardin and Saint-Exupéry, more recent figures who sought to reconcile God and the world, celebrating the being of the universe and viewing matter and mind not as distinct but as two states of one same cosmic fabric. Saint-Exupéry's notion that there is no divine grace that excuses you from becoming, and that one attains being in God through self-shaping actions, aligns with the pagan emphasis on human agency and self-creation. In summary, Benoist identifies these heretical trends as a persistent other religion of Europe characterized by divine immanence. God is found within the world, and man, not radically separate or transcendent. Human freedom and self-creation. Man is seen as capable of self-overcoming, achieving a supernature or superhumanity, and creating his own values and destiny, rather than being a fallen, inherently sinful creature dependent on an external God. Rejection of dualism, a unified view of the cosmos where spirit and matter, body and soul, are continuous and interconnected, rather than radically opposed. Affirmation of life and world. A yes to life that embraces existence in its entirety, including its contradictions and struggles, as a path to divine manifestation, in contrast to the Judeo-Christian no to life and disdain for the world. Emphasis on intuition and experience. Knowledge of God and the sacred comes through intuition and direct experience within the world, rather than solely through revealed texts or abstract reason. These trends, according to Benoist, represent a continuous struggle against the cultural pathology of Judeo-Christian monotheism, offering an alternative spiritual path for Europe. What is Heideggerian influence and the concept of being in the world, Dasein? Martin Heidegger's philosophy significantly influences Alain de Benoist's thought, particularly in his critique of Judeo-Christianity and his development of a new pagan philosophy. Heideggerian influence. Heidegger's influence is evident in several key aspects of Benoist's work. Critique of history and time. Heidegger's understanding of temporality is used to counter the linear, teleological conception of history found in Judeo-Christian monotheism. Benoist highlights Heidegger's idea of historizing, Geschehen, human existence, where past, present, and future mutually enrich and transform each other in the immediate present. This rejects the Judeo-Christian notion of a definitively past past. Another beginning for paganism. Benoist explicitly frames the return of paganism as a recourse to paganism and an another beginning, directly quoting Heidegger on the need to recapture the beginning of our historical spiritual existence in order to transform it into a new beginning. This involves not imitating the past, but beginning again more originally, embracing strangeness, darkness, insecurity. The sacred and the divine. Heidegger distinguishes the sacred, das Heilige, from traditional metaphysics and the idea of God. For Heidegger, the sacred is mystery, rooted in the intimacy between man and the world, contrasting with holiness, which is tied to the radical transcendence of an absolute other. This distinction aligns with paganism's sacralization of this world. Rejection of creation. Ex nihilo. Heidegger is noted for demonstrating that the idea of creation, ex nihilo, out of nothing, does not originate from philosophy. This supports the pagan view of an uncreated, eternal world. Death of God and nihilism. Heidegger's perspective on the death of God is seen as the inevitable consequence of the death of the real, caused by Judeo-Christian discourse, leading to European nihilism. However, for Heidegger, this nihilism is not an end, but an obligatory transition to another beginning, a historical movement that involves both the destruction and creation of values. Will to power and overman. Heidegger connects Nietzsche's concepts of the will to power, superhumanity, and the eternal return. He interprets the overman not as a superspecies, but as the one who rises above the man of yesterday and today to bring humanity to its essential being through a long chain of the highest self-overcomings. The Heideggerian fourfold. Benoist refers to a metaphysics that subordinates God to a being within a unified fourfold, das Gewirt, the Heideggerian fourfold, that similarly consists of earth, sky, man, and God, where all elements are central and interdependent. This challenges the Judeo-Christian separation of God from the world and man. Man as creator of meaning. Heidegger's thought reinforces the idea of man as a giver of meaning. For Benoist, drawing on Heidegger, man does not discover a pre-existing meaning, but founds and creates the world by the meaning he gives to things. This is a continuous process of Sinnverleihungen, provisions of meaning. Ontology, metaphysics, and anthropology. Heidegger's work emphasizes the deep interconnectedness of these fields, stating that only from the truth of being can the essence of the holy, and then divinity, be understood. This questioning of being, prevented by Christian faith's a priori answer, is crucial for the reawakening of the spirit. The concept of being in the world, Dasein. Benoist explicitly cites Heidegger's concept of being in the world, Dasein, as fundamental. Inseparability of being and man. For Heidegger, being, Sein, is inseparable from man as being in the world, Dasein. This signifies that human existence is not merely in the world as an object, but fundamentally is its relationship with the world. Temporality and historicity. Dasein is intrinsically found in history and is temporal to the depths of its being. It is not a timeless essence, but a being constantly unfolding in time. Unique mode of being. Dasein is a singular way of being that cannot be reduced to a sum of other beings. It is truly, in itself, characterized by permanence, identicalness, continuance, projection, all of which point to a constant presence. Reciprocity with being. Heideggerian being is neither God nor a collection of beings. It is that being which cannot do without man, just as man cannot do without it. This highlights a mutual dependence between human existence and being itself. Questioning. Being, uniquely, only man, Dasein, can question himself about being and attain its truth. This capacity to inquire into the nature of existence is central to human identity and spiritual reawakening. Opening to the world, Weltoffenheit. This ontological dimension of the human being, described by Heidegger as the open, is both a gift being and a perpetual recreation of man. It provides human specificity, allowing the totality of beings to form a world for and by us, rather than man being just one entity among many in a pre-given world. In essence, Heidegger's concepts provide a philosophical framework for Benoist to articulate a pagan worldview that challenges Judeo-Christian dualism, linear history, and the devaluation of human autonomy, instead promoting a view of man's immanent connection to the world and his creative role in shaping meaning and destiny. What is the Nietzschean overcoming? Nietzschean overcoming, as discussed in the book, is a profound philosophical concept central to Alain de Benoist's development of a new pagan philosophy and his critique of Judeo-Christian monotheism. It encapsulates a vision of human existence marked by self-mastery, continuous self-transformation, and the assertion of creative autonomy. Here are the key aspects of Nietzschean overcoming. Self-surpassing and creative power. The core of Nietzschean overcoming is the idea that man must constantly surpass himself, going beyond himself to realize his full potential. This is not a static goal, but an ongoing process of self-overcomings. Man is viewed as a giver of meaning, who founds and creates the world by the meaning he gives to things. This proactive, creative role contrasts sharply with the Judeo-Christian notion of man as a dependent creature awaiting divine revelation. The Superman, Overman. The Superman or Overman is Nietzsche's concept for the one who rises above the man of yesterday and today, uniquely to bring this man, in the very first instance, to his being, which is always suffering, and establish him there. This figure embodies human elevation and the ability to share in the divine by pushing beyond one's limits, not by becoming a transcendent god, but by becoming like the gods in their creative capacity. This directly challenges the biblical condemnation of man's desire to become as a god, as an abomination. The will to power. This fundamental drive is described as the desire to live, the will to grow, the will of the will issued from the being of the being. It is about inscribing one's values and projects onto the world, and it is seen as the measure of a person's or people's worth to place on his experience the seal of eternity. The book emphasizes a mandatory connection between the will to power, superhumanity, and the eternal return, all linked to taking mastery over the earth. Rejection of Judeo-Christian morality and dualism. Nietzschean. Overcoming is presented as a direct challenge to the dualistic worldview and moral framework of Judeo-Christianity. It critiques the biblical emphasis on humility and submission, seeing pride, the desire for absolute human autonomy, as the preeminent sin in Judeo-Christian thought. Overcoming, conversely, embraces this autonomy and the expansion of the self. It rejects the idea of abstract moral categories of absolute good and evil imposed from an external, transcendent God. Instead, it asserts that there are no moral phenomena, there are only moral interpretations of phenomena. It proposes a God beyond good and evil, reflecting a pagan understanding where gods are not absolute good, but embody both good and evil as sublimated forms of life's inherent antagonisms. Embrace of conflict and suffering. Nietzsche's philosophy recognizes suffering not as a sign of guilt or divine punishment, but as a powerful force for spiritual liberation and self-development. Only great pain is the ultimate liberator of the spirit. It advocates a tragic way of living through suffering, rather than merely tolerating it. Furthermore, it sees conflict and the strife of opposites as inherent to life and the universe, essential for transformation and evolution, in contrast to the Judeo-Christian ideal of universal peace that seeks to abolish conflicts and differences. Another beginning and the death of God. The death of God, for Nietzsche, is interpreted not as an end to spirituality, but as an inevitable consequence of the death of the real caused by Judeo-Christian discourse. This European nihilism is seen as an obligatory transition to another beginning, a historical movement that involves both the destruction and creation of values. Overcoming, therefore, is about moving beyond this nihilism by affirming life in its entirety and creating new values. In essence, Nietzschean. Overcoming, as interpreted in the book, is a call for a robust, life-affirming humanism that empowers individuals to forge their own meaning, embrace their creative potential, and confront existence with courage and intensity, rejecting external impositions and dualistic limitations, thereby establishing a Faustian paganism for a new era.